Tell you a story about what happened to me last year. I went out fishing and I was basically in the middle of the lake, and after about an hour and a half, my gauges on my boat stopped working, my fish finder turned off, my electric motor was super slow, and I didn't even have enough power to start my outboard, which was a big problem. What I discovered was that I not only had not enough batteries, I had the wrong ones. So what I did was I started analyzing what I actually needed. So one, I needed my outboard to be able to start anytime that I needed it to. Two, I wanted my fish finder and my gauges to work throughout the entire fishing trip. It's not too much to ask. And I also wanted my trolling motor to run at least 50% at 50% power level for a 4-hour period so that I could enjoy my electric motor. This was a lot to ask for from what I noticed. So I looked at lead acid batteries, I looked at lithium phosphate batteries, and this is what I kind of came up with. This is what I found to be the most important parts here of the battery selections. One, lithium phosphate are extremely light, but they're extremely pricey. The lead acid batteries are very heavy, but they're inexpensive. So we have to find a balance between price and functionality here. So let's use a very simple example. We have a Minn Kota C30, which requires 30 amps every hour at 12 volts to function at full throttle. So that makes 360 watts of power every hour you need to run that Minn Kota C30 at full power. Now, the battery, if you're using a 100 amp hour battery, either be it lead acid or be it lithium phosphate, you have 12 volts at 100 amps, that's 1200 watts. That's using Ohm's law. Pretty straightforward. Volts times amps equals power, equals watts. So you have 1200 watts of power for both batteries. Now, I use the lead acid battery and I take my 360 watts and I say, okay, I have 1200 watts, I divide 1200 by 360 watts, and what that gives me is it gives me 3.3 hours of battery life, but not really. Because remember, the lead acid battery only has 50% utilization, right? So your 1200 watts actually becomes 600 watts. So now you have, actually instead of 3.3 hours, you're only getting 50% of that 3.3 hours. So what you have is 1.7 hours of power. Now coming back to the example I gave you, the issue that I had, remember I said after an hour and a half everything started shutting down. Well, 1.7 hours is pretty close, right? So 1.7 hours, that's what was happening. My lead acid battery was just dying. That's the maximum I could get out of it. So then I looked at lithium phosphate batteries, and the same 100 amp hour, again 12 volts times 100 amps gives me 1200 watts, same amount of power. And I divide it by 360 and I get 3.3 hours. Again, however, 85% utilization rate. So that gives me 2.8 hours of usage time. That means that for 2.8 hours, I can run 12 volts at 30 amps, that electric motor, and run for 2.8 hours versus 1.7 hours. So this is the solution I came up with. One, I'm going to have a house battery and I'm going to have a crank battery to start my motor. I'll set up a dual battery system using those batteries, and that'll give me my power on the boat for my gauges, my fish finder, and to be able to start my motor. I'm going to add a dual switch on there, a blue C dual switch on there, so that it can charge both batteries while the motor is running and isolate my crank battery when the motor is not running. That way there I'll always have power, even though if I drain the other one completely, if I drain the house battery completely, I will still have power to start my outboard. And as for the Minn Kota electric motor, I'm going to use a lithium phosphate 100 amp hour battery as a separate system for that. That'll give me 4.5 hours at 50% power. That was part of my initial requirements. Well, I hope that this was helpful. Thank you for listening, and please subscribe.